Donald Trump made a promise in his second term to carry out the largest deportation operation this country has ever seen. Well, ICE just shared data with Congressman Mike Levin, who then shared it with the public. Data that ICE says reflects the agency's focus on executing those orders from the president. Between January 20th, 2025 and April 1st, 2026, ICE says it's removed more than 16,000 undocumented immigrants from the San Diego area. It also lists the citizenship country for each of those individuals, 66% coming from Mexico.
These numbers are sending a clear message to people that if you are losing your status, you better speak with an attorney, you better try to do something about it.
Meanwhile,
Undocumented immigrants, the Trump administration is dusting off a rarely used law to hit thousands of migrants with hefty fines. The president wants them to pay up and get out. Investigative reporter Hilda Gutierrez joins us now with the exclusive story. Hilda.
These civil lawsuits were filed by Justice Department attorneys just this week. They were looking to collect more than $300,000 combined from two Bay Area immigrants accused of staying in the country after a judge ordered their removal. But immigration attorneys argue the penalties are excessive and unconstitutional.
The notices from ICE showed up in June at a San Francisco apartment in the Mission and another in San Bruno. The letter stating two undocumented immigrants were being hit with hefty fines. The reason? For not leaving the country after a judge ordered their removal when they missed hearings in immigration court. One of them was given a deportation order in July of last year and now faces $300,000 in fines. The other missed her hearing this past March and owes more than $40,000.
So we are expecting to see a tsunami of people being penalized under these laws.
Merle Kahn is an attorney with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center in San Francisco. She said the Trump administration is using a 1997 law that's never been used by another U.S. president.
The purpose is simply to sow terror in the immigrant community because it's so arbitrary and so capricious, and trying to collect hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars from them when they have no assets. They don't have a house in Los Gatos or Saratoga. They're cleaning the houses in Los Gatos and Saratoga.
A woman living in San Diego recently made headlines after ICE hit her with a massive $1.8 million fine. She originally arrived in the United States at 13. She has 3 kids currently in college, and her criminal record is completely clean. The media cover her story from every possible angle, painting a picture of a terrified mother and a family being torn apart by a government that has lost its mind. What most outlets buried deep in the text, if they even mention it at all, is that a federal judge ordered her to leave the country years ago. She found out about that removal order back in 2013 and decided to stay anyway, which is a specific detail that changes the entire conversation. And we need to actually talk about what is happening here, from these massive fines to the new push for denaturalization and everything the news cycles keep leaving on the cutting room floor. So with no further ado, family, let's check it out.
Well, as President Trump's mass deportations roll on, his administration is also levying some pretty big fines against undocumented immigrants. One woman says hers was more than $1.8 million. NBC7's Shelby Bremer has her story.
It can often take years for people to adjust their immigration status through legal pathways. And as they wait, the Trump administration has started issuing heavy fines. So one woman in the green card process went to check her mail and found a massive bill.
No criminal record, no issues. She's just been trying to get this fixed for a long time.
That's how immigration attorney William Menard describes his client, who came to the U.S. from Mexico decades ago when she was about 13 years old. She's so terrified right now, she doesn't want to show her face. She's undocumented, but told us for years she had no idea the government had ordered her to leave. When she found out in 2013, she started the process to fix her status with a family full of American citizens.
I have 3 beautiful kids, and they're all in the university. They're good kids. So I can't not be without them.
She's been checking in with ICE as she waits for her case to make its way through the backlogged system. But on Friday, she got this in the mail, a 7-figure fine from ICE. The Department of Homeland Security last year changed its rules to make it easier to find people who are out of status and to increase the amount, up to nearly $1,000 for each day in the U.S. past a removal order.
I was asking myself why this is happening to me when you're trying to do the right thing.
She's not alone. A DHS spokesperson said from when President Trump took office through mid-March of this year, ICE has issued about 65,000 of these fines, totaling more than $36 billion. Our message is clear, the agency said in a statement. Illegal aliens in the country illegally should leave now or face consequences.
They know that these people can't pay close to $2 million in fines. It's not going to happen.
2 women who received similar fines filed a class action lawsuit last year, arguing it would drive them into ruinous debt. Menard's client cleans houses for a living.
Is there any way that you could pay that?
No. No, not at all.
She says the U.S. is the only home she's ever known, but she thinks she understands why she got this notice.
I think just to scare people and to just push them to deport themselves. They want us to leave.
Menard says they do plan to appeal that fine as they wait for her paperwork to be processed. As for the class action lawsuit, there's a hearing scheduled in that case for May 13th. From downtown, Shelby Bremer, NBC7.
Let's walk through the actual timeline because the facts are not complicated, though they are inconvenient for the narrative the media is selling. This woman entered the country illegally as a teenager, and the immigration court eventually issued a formal removal order. She found out about that order in 2013, which gave her a clear choice: leave or find a legal path to address that Pacific court ruling. Instead, she started the green card application process, kept living in San Diego. That sounds reasonable until you realize a pending application does not cancel a deportation order. These are 2 completely separate legal tracks. The application goes through the United States Customs Enforcement, while the removal order comes directly from a federal judge. And you cannot focus on one and pretend the other does not exist. The math behind the fine is brutal. Department of Homeland Security updated its rules to allow roughly $1,000 for every single day you guys heard a person stay past their removal deadline. Calculate that over more than a decade and you get to $1.8 million quickly. Everyone knows she will never actually write that check, but the total is not really the point. This fine is a legal consequence tied to a violation she knew about for years and chose not to fix. The law allowing these penalties was not something the Trump administration just made up, as it has actually been sitting on the books since 1997 for nearly 30 years. No previous administration decided to enforce this rule at a large scale, but that changed recently. Between January of 2025 and the middle of March, ICE sent out about 65,000 of these fines, as you guys heard, which added up to more than $36 billion. This is a massive shift in national policy rather than a personal attack on one specific person in California. Most coverage focused entirely on the sympathetic parts: her clean record, her 3 kids in college. Those details are real and they matter, but they are not the facts that matter most in a courtroom. She knew the deportation order existed and she stayed anyway. Her own attorney admitted on camera that she had been checking in with ICE regularly, which means the government knew where she was. She knew what the judge had ordered, and the situation sat there unresolved for over a decade. There is a basic legal principle that applies here. You cannot use a pending application to ignore a standing court order. If a judge says you owe a debt and you file an appeal, you still have to deal with that debt while you wait. These processes run parallel to each other. One does not cancel the other. And that is not a harsh immigration rule. It's just how the court system works. The real question at the heart of this story is one the media refuses to answer honestly. If a court orders someone to leave and nothing happens for years, at what point does the law stop being a law? If the answer is that the rules do not apply whenever a situation feels sympathetic enough, then do you not really have a legal system anymore? You just have a list of suggestions that people can choose to wait out. These fines are a major escalation, but the administration is going even further by targeting people who already have their citizenship, which is where the media coverage really started to spiral. But don't take my word for it, family. I want you guys to check it out for yourself.
The Justice Department confirmed Thursday that it has started its push for denaturalization, assigning hundreds of cases to prosecutors across the country.
The DOJ has identified 384 foreign-born Americans whose citizenship it wants to revoke, marking a significant uptick in such cases. Now, between 1990 and 2018, the government brought just 305 denaturalization cases. The DOJ's Deputy Director for Communications, Matthew Trageser, said the Department of Justice is laser focused on rooting out criminal aliens, defrauding the naturalization process. And Republican Senator Eric Schmidt defended the move, saying, "We must be unapologetic about this. Denaturalization is a constitutional, long-established tool for stripping citizenship from people who should have never received it. Citizenship is more than paperwork. We should expand denaturalizations."
Now, others were critical of the move, however, concerned for what it could mean on a broader scale. Law professor Amanda Frost told the New York Times, "The message it sends is that naturalized citizens don't have the same rights and stability as native-born citizens. The government has used this power in the past to target people it views as political opponents." And journalist Mehdi Hassan wrote on X, quote, "I have been trying to warn folks about this coming our way for years now." I think if somebody is naturalized and then to say, I'm pulling the rug from you and stripping you of citizenship and revoking their citizenship completely, it will create this like underclass of people that will come about because what are the reasons? I'd like to know, knowing that there's around the same amount of cases that they're looking at right now that there were over like 2 decades, what makes these 300 stick out to do immediately as opposed to what we've done historically, which is like, if there's somebody that came through the cracks that shouldn't be here, let's figure it out. But why are we targeting all these people right now, and is it necessary?
Well, I think it is a more detailed process. I know I keep beating this drum of the Obama administration, but that was the recent most popular president. He left office with 90% approval from Democrats. He had a very similar operation. Maybe it was smaller scale, but it was a huge fingerprinting operation. They were matching naturalization records to criminal records. They were doing all of this sort of thing because immigration crimes are crimes, and it is serious. And, they're looking at people who lied on their paperwork or, they did something. They lied about being married when they weren't. The green card process was used to their advantage incorrectly. It's basically cheating the system is what it is. And there is a process for booting those people out. And Democrats have said, let's focus on the criminals. And if we're focusing on the criminals, this is a type of crime. Immigration crime is.
Denaturalization sounds like a word designed to scare people, but it means something very specific. If you got your citizenship through fraud or deliberate lying, the government has the power to take it back. I ask you a question, family. Let me know down in the comments. Because I seen this on social media. I came across a story that was on TikTok somewhere going viral where a woman had a temporary visa in Canada and it was almost time for it to be up, but she had the privilege to go back and forth from Canada to the United States because she's originally a United States citizen. She had family back in the States, and also she had land of like 43 acres or so forth. I covered a video on this, but my point is the suspicion started to rise as her visa was being up because Canada had the concern that she was still going to stay anyway. So I make that whole point of, family, if you are allowed and you have a visa to go to Canada and they have their own immigration customs enforcement, which every country does in its own shape, way, and form, if an American already raises suspicion, even though their visa that was already set for a certain period of time is coming to an end and they're going back and forth to see family members, or a sick family member, which I remember from the story and recall, a sick parent of theirs, they kept going back and forth to see and visit and help with their, medical and things like that with hospitalization and stuff in America. Well, the Canada is like, wait, we know that you're still legal for now, but your visa is coming up. So are you planning to still stay here anyway? So it started raising suspicions because going in and outside of the country of Canada, going back to America, going back to Canada, it makes you wonder, what are you really doing? Right? And they seen her media. They seen how she talked about Canada. They liked her content, according to one of the customs enforcement in Canada. And not to make the story long, but I'm basically saying, family, and I want to know you guys' thoughts in the comments. If you can go to Canada and they have to make sure your paperwork is right, and even though they raise suspicions, even though your time is coming to an end for your visa that they no longer decide to extend to remain a citizen in Canada, if you can't stay in Canada, what makes it right for any other country? If an American cannot stay in Canada any way, shape, or form, if they chose, even if they're illegal or they're lying on their paperwork, visa paperwork or whatever the case may be. So if Canada is very strict and enforce their borders for their national security for their country, does it make it wrong for any other country? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But speaking to this about denaturalization, where I was getting to, if you got your citizenship through fraud or deliberate lying, the government has the power to take it back, right? And right now, the Department of Justice has identified 384 foreign-born Americans whose citizenship it wants to revoke. And the media is treating this like the opening of a dystopian novel, okay? And I want to make that very, very clear, because what most of these reports leave out is that between 1999 and 2018, nearly 3 decades, the government only brought about 305 denaturalization cases total. Only 305. Assigning 384 cases at once is a big jump in pace, and it deserves scrutiny. But the legal authority behind it is not new, and it's not controversial. It has been sitting in federal law for a very long time. Courts started using denaturalization in the early 1900s, but Congress sharpened the tool in 1978 with the Holtzman Amendment. You can look it up. That law was written to go after war criminals who lied about their past to enter the United States after World War II. These were people who filled out immigration paperwork that mentioned none of what they had done and then lived as American citizens for decades. Congress said that was unacceptable and built a mechanism into law. If citizenship was obtained through fraud, it could be undone. That was not a controversial idea at the time. It only starts to sound like one now because the scale is increasing and the political temperature is already running hot. There is one thing about the naturalization application that gets ignored in almost all of the news coverage: the fact that it's a sworn legal document. When you sign that paper, you're doing so under penalty of perjury, which means you are telling the federal government under oath that every single word on that form is true and complete. And if you hide a criminal conviction, lie about your identity, or misrepresent your marital status just to game the green card process, you didn't just fill out a form incorrectly. You actually committed a federal crime during the act of becoming a citizen. And because the citizenship itself was built on a fraudulent foundation, the whole agreement becomes void. The process for revoking that status isn't just a quick phone call from a random bureaucrat, because the Department of Justice has to take every single case to a federal district court. They have to prove the fraud to a judge who doesn't answer to the White House, using the same court system that has blocked plenty of other immigration moves when the legal case wasn't strong enough. If someone tries to tell you that the administration is stripping citizenship by executive order overnight, they are either misinformed or they're choosing to hide how the process actually works. I'm not here to tell you how to think. I'm just here to inform you on the process, and you think for yourself while we have a productive conversation of this thing. Because as always, we're just having a conversation, no matter if you agree or not. But perspectives are amazing, right? Because then if you have different perspectives, you can also embrace how the overall sentiment of the situation is being looked at. So when we look at what kinds of fraud are actually triggering these cases, hiding criminal convictions that would have disqualified someone from citizenship is the most common reason. Other cases involve people lying about their identity or using fake documents to enter the country, along with those who misrepresented their marital status to get a green card through a spouse. These aren't just simple paperwork errors or typos, but are instead deliberate choices made at a specific point in the immigration process to get a legal status the person knew they couldn't get honestly. Critics keep pointing out that past administrations only targeted people who committed those most serious crimes. And while that is true, it actually supports the government's position. The principle has always been that fraud in the process makes the result invalid. The current administration is applying that same logic more broadly. You can argue about the speed or question the standards, but the legal logic itself has not changed.
The Trump administration is now working to strip hundreds of people of their American citizenship. The New York Times reports that the Justice Department has identified 384 foreign-born Americans whose citizenship it wants to revoke. It's not clear at all why these individuals are being targeted. The Times also reports there's a push to fast-track the process, giving the cases to prosecutors in dozens of U.S. attorneys' offices across the country. Former Senator Barbara Boxer is back with me. Also joining us, Veronica Cardenas, and immigration lawyer and former assistant chief counsel for ICE. Veronica, between 2017 and 2025, the government sought to strip just over 120 naturalized Americans of their citizenship. But before Trump was elected, this was not common, an average of just 11 people a year. What do you think is going on here? And do you have any idea why they're targeting these folks?
I think this is a continuation of this administration's rhetoric. They're going after the worst of the worst. Then they were going after non-citizens who didn't have criminal convictions. And now they're going after naturalized citizens. And it's creating a second-class citizenship for people who've naturalized. We've seen him do this push with birthright citizenship. So there's this message to immigrants who've made it to citizenship that they are still not safe. Now, it's not clear why these people were targeted or why they have been identified, but when you look back to that January 2025 memo that this administration created, it had 10 grounds for revocation or denaturalization. One of them was significantly important to pursue. That is so vague and open-ended, and so that could really be used arbitrarily just to meet certain quotas.
Well, can I ask you about the quotas? Because as I understand it, DHS staffers have been ordered to refer upwards of 200 denaturalized cases a month to DOJ. I mean, what do you even do with that?
Right. And this just looks like it's on the books to show that they're doing something to create a fear amongst citizens who've been in this country for many years. When we look at prior administrations and who they targeted, they were targeting war crime criminals, like in Nazi Germany. They're targeting people who have committed heinous crimes, that they did not disclose that on their naturalization citizenship forms. But now we don't
Because
know.
we should help people understand, if you have a serious criminal record, you're not going to become a naturalized citizen under the process as it stands.
Exactly. And if you lied on that application and you didn't disclose that, there should be consequences. But what this administration...
So if there should be consequences, then you're sort of hypocritical because you're basically saying it's creating fear, but then you're saying there's consequences if you lie on the application, which I just explained the process. I see what she said.
Administration is doing is something more than that, because they're going through all of these applications, and the application process is a very long process. It's very complicated. There may be mistakes on that application, but it didn't mean that they intended to defraud the government. So our saving grace here is that this process...
Okay, well, there may be mistakes, but the simple fact is you're supposed to fill out the form as honest as possible. And if there is mistakes, then there's no reason why the integrity of the whole process shouldn't be upheld for verification to take place. If there is many or little mistakes, then obviously those mistakes are being obviously double checked. So what's wrong with double checking it? But also you just said in the same sense that there should be consequences if there's fraudulent information on there. It's all still under the umbrella of fraudulent information. And however, it's a double check and verification process. And I'm pretty sure that the Department of Justice would question those individuals to actually understand what's going on. But however, you should be upholding the oath that you automatically commit to when you do fill out the form to the utmost ability, especially if you take the citizenship, let alone honor in the country that you're going in seriously. If an American were to go to Canada and they didn't really take the application seriously, then what's the integrity, let alone the respect to that country that you're trying to enter? Where does that stand? Where is the standard? Because then it could come off treasonous. And no country wants to allow someone treasonous into their country, because if you're against their country, why would they let you in if you're so busy, if you're so interested in being there? Right? And you're walking into their culture, into their community, into their standards, into their rules on how they operate within their own culture. Right? The same way we can say about American culture. So I'm not saying mistakes can't happen being objective, but the simple fact is, if it's intentional with someone knowing that they committed fraud, and consequences, like she said, should take place, then there's nothing wrong with double checking to make sure the same way they would verify the information through the process, even though it's long and drawn out for a reason, to respect and uphold the integrity of individuals coming into the country and being naturalized. Also, out of respect for those who went through that long process as well and done everything right that they were supposed to do, upholding the oath. So if there's consequences, even though it's been double checked to make sure from the Department of Justice standpoint, then the consequences, if they knowingly have intentionally committed something wrong, they'll be held accountable. It's no different from someone who is a convicted felon or committed a crime, and then they apply for a job, and then they sit there and don't check off the box that they have been in prison, but then obviously it shows on their record. Do you really think they're going to get the job? I'll take it a step further. If someone is applying for a mortgage loan to get a house, a first home time buyer, and there's programs set up for that where you get, first home time buyers, you got to obviously stay within the confines. For example, you may have to stay in that home for 10 plus years because there's a first home time buyer grant through the state or through the county that you're in to promote home ownership. But the simple fact is you lie about your income to justify the amount of loan to get the bigger the house that you want, then obviously that would be mortgage fraud, because then you're basically trying to justify knowingly lying about your income to justify of getting more house than you can actually afford. An American citizen would be in prison and really suffer consequences. So is any of these situations similar that could be upheld for when Americans hold oath to the very things that they try to do, let alone the opportunities that they have, and understanding that with these opportunities, responsibilities come with it. And if you don't sit there and uphold by following the law, then you can be investigated by the Department of Justice just like any other process. So what I'm looking at is three pillars from the whole immigration standpoint. You got individuals in the country illegal. You got individuals that's sitting here knowingly that they committed fraud and they intentionally tried it anyway and just figure, they won't figure out. And maybe it's individuals that got away with it, so it incentivized and motivated other individuals that wanted to apply for naturalization into the country to say, oh man, you could do it, they won't check. Well, now double checking is taking place, and now it's fear, quote unquote. And then the third thing is there may be a mistake, but then it just needs to, be interviewed through the interview process. I'm sure there's interview processes to verify, but it should be tedious going into another country, right? Out of a protection for our people and being fair. The rules are the rules. There has to be a standard, or everybody could do what they want when they want to do it. Right? Just in anything in life. That's like, for example, if you go to school and you go to a college, right, and you uphold the standards when you apply to that college and you got accepted, you understood that you represented that college on the campus and off campus, and you understood that your actions represent that institution, because eventually they look for you to be an alumni and a good representation to the standard that they uphold within their alma mater, within their mascot, and the very academic integrity, that oath that you take when it comes to the academic integrity that you uphold, signing on and taking those classes to eventually gain skills to be valuable in the workplace. The family, do you see a difference in anything else, whether you're becoming a naturalized citizen and applying to come into America, or Americas in general, that rules are rules and process, there's a process for everything, and everything with a process has rules? Let me know in the comments, But the Department of Justice own public statement said it plainly. The Deputy Director for Communications said it by name. The department is going after people who defrauded the naturalization process. That is the very first sentence of their public statement, not buried in a footnote. When a news anchor says the reason is not clear, they either did not read the statement or they read it and they decided their audience did not need to know. And the second-class citizenship argument is getting a lot of airtime, and it deserves a direct answer. The idea is that targeting naturalized citizens sends a message that their status is less secure than people born here. That would be a real concern if the government were going after people who did everything right. But that's not what's happening. These cases are about people who lied on a sworn federal document. The argument only holds if you leave out the fraud entirely, which is exactly what most coverage does when it describes the outcome without ever mentioning the cause. Now, there are two parts of this debate that we should take seriously. I want to get them to you straight without any spin. The first is the quota piece, where Department of Homeland Security staffers were reportedly ordered to refer 200 denaturalization cases every month to the Department of Justice. That number deserves real scrutiny because when you build a system around hitting a specific goal, the danger is that that number starts dividing the decisions instead of the actual evidence. Quotas in law enforcement have a long history of producing the exact kind of overreach that people are worried about. So asking the government to be transparent about these referrals is a fair demand. The January 2025 memo. The January 2025 memo is the other piece of this puzzle that we need to flag, specifically where it lists significantly important to pursue, quote unquote, as a ground for denaturalization. If you read that again, you'll realize it isn't a legal standard at all, but it is instead a vague phrase that means whatever the person in charge wants it to mean. Vague language in enforcement policy isn't just a minor drafting problem, but it's a structural opening for decisions that can't be challenged because there's no clear line to point to. The only real solution here is specificity, which means writing clearer standards, defining the criteria, and making the entire process something that can be audited. This is where the coverage loses the thread completely. The idea that a policy could be misused is not the same thing as saying it is being misused right now. Those are two different arguments that require different evidence and lead to different conclusions. But the news runs them together constantly. One is a warning worth listening to. The other is a serious charge that needs actual proof. And when you mix them up, you're not informing anyone. You're just alarming them. And people are trying to understand what is actually happening deserve better than that. Think about citizenship as a contract. Because that is exactly what it is. One side agrees to tell the truth, finish the paperwork, and meet every legal requirement, while the other side agrees to grant full membership into the country along with all the rights and protections that come with it. When one party signs that contract using false information, the argument becomes voidable. This does not happen because the government is being cruel, but because that is simply how a contract works. The moment you falsify the foundation, you don't have a real agreement anymore. And instead, you just have a document that looks like one. Here's an analogy that has nothing to do with immigration. Like I said, you lie on a job application, claim a degree you never earned and get hired. 10 years later, the company finds out. In most states, they can let you go immediately, not for anything you did during those 10 years, but because the agreement that brought you in was built on a lie. Time passing does not turn a fraudulent start into a legitimate one. The same logic applies here. I've made this point before on other topics, but it needs to be said plainly here as well. The Obama administration ran a major operation that did exactly what critics are now calling unprecedented. They fingerprinted applications and cross-referenced naturalization records against criminal databases to find people who slipped through the process or through the cracks with hidden histories. Democrats were not on television calling it a second-class citizenship agenda back then. They were fine with it because enforcing immigration law is not actually a partisan position, but it becomes one depending on who is in power and whether your team is the one making the calls. The argument that someone has been here for years comes up constantly, and it does not hold up as a legal principle. It is emotionally understandable because someone who has lived somewhere for a decade genuinely feels like they belong there, but the length of time you live somewhere does not make the way you got there legal after the fact. If it did, you would be creating an incentive to just run out the clock, right? You would create an incentive to run out the clock. You would not have a legal system anymore. You would just have a waiting game where the people who hide the longest win by default. The people who never get brought in to these conversations are the ones who did everything the right way. These are the legal immigrants who waited years for visa appointments, paid thousands in filing fees, and studied for citizenship tests while disclosing every embarrassing or complicated detail in their applications. They did it because they understood that honesty was the price of entry. When fraud in the naturalization process goes unchallenged, you are not just letting one person off the hook, you're telling every honest applicant that the process they respected was actually optional for everyone else. That is a real cost that falls on real people, yet almost none of them are appearing on cable news to talk about it. The constitutional structure is functioning the way it was designed to. Congress wrote the immigration and naturalization laws. The executive branch is enforcing them, and federal courts are reviewing each case on its merits. These judges are independent and have already shown they will push back when the legal case is not solid. All three branches are doing their jobs. You can disagree with the pace or question the standards, but the machinery of government is working the way it was set up to work. I mean, we do know for government to run very slow, right? Because she mentioned that it's a long process. The concern I would take seriously, because it is a real problem. Enforcement without clearly defined standards and consistent oversight does not just catch the people who deserve it, but it creates openings for decisions that cannot be explained or defended, right? That is my concern about enforcement without clearly defined standards and consistent oversight that does not just catch the people who deserve it, but it creates openings for decisions that can't be explained or defended. I said it again for the people in the back. It's not a talking point from one side of the aisle, but it is a basic principle that anyone who thinks seriously about government power should hold regardless of which party is running things. Being objective here. Demanding transparency and written criteria is not the same thing as opposing the law. That is just what responsible enforcement looks like, and the government should be able to meet the standard without flinching. The people sitting at the center of all this are not the politicians or the commentators, but are the working class Americans in cities where immigration policy is not an abstract debate. For them, it's a competition for jobs in specific industries and for apartments in specific zip codes or spots in local school districts. These people have direct interest in whether the rules were followed because they followed the rules themselves and it cost them time, money, and years of their lives. Nobody put a camera on them while they were waiting, and nobody ran a sympathetic segment about the fees they paid, but they did it anyway because that is what you are supposed to do. Both sides of this conversation owe the public more honesty than they are currently offering, and the government needs to provide clear and consistent enforcement standards instead of using vague phrases and memos that mean whatever someone decides they mean that week. At the same time, the media owes its audience the full picture rather than just the details that generate sympathy and clicks. Right now, one side is governing by a certain vibe while the other is reporting based on emotion, and the people in the middle are just trying to figure out what is actually true. You can want the law enforced and still want it to be done correctly. Those two things do not cancel each other out. In fact, they actually reinforce each other. An enforcement system that is consistent, transparent, and grounded in law is a much stronger system than the one that operates purely on political momentum. That is the standard worth demanding from any administration in any era, and it is the only way to ensure the system remains fair for everyone involved. If the path to becoming a citizen loses its integrity, the entire concept of citizenship starts to fall apart, and it hurts everyone from lifelong local to the person who spent years earning their status the right way. This whole situation forces us to ask where the line sits between fair government and government overreach. So I want you to head down in the comments and tell me exactly where you land on that. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. As always, we just having a conversation. Let the love supersede the hate. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. I'll catch you in the next one, family. Love you guys. Peace.